All right, we're back in the FITSNews studios this week for a Thanksgiving weekend edition of the Weekend Review. You know, we had actually planned not to do an episode this week, take a break for the holidays, but events interposed themselves upon us. Some big news out of Colleton County, the arrest of Colt Hill, the son of Colleton County Clerk of Court Becky Hill, who, as our audience is well aware, is at the center of some seismic allegations that could lead to a new trial for convicted killer Alex Murdaugh. We're going to walk you through exactly what happened this past week in Colleton County. I'm going to sit down with our resident Murdoch expert, our director of research, Jen Wood. We're going to go point by point and share a few details you might not have heard yet about this process and a big looming evidentiary hearing that will decide whether Alex Murdaugh gets a new trial. That's heading your way on a special holiday edition of Your Week in Review. All right, I am here with Jen Wood, our research director, resident Murdoch expert, and we're going to walk through a crazy week of news that we think is tied to the Murdochs, could be tied to the Murdochs, may not be tied to the Murdochs. There's so many parts of this story, you know, that revolve around this family or that are adjacent to this family, where there's a clear nexus to the Murdochs and to their long-running history down there in the South Carolina 14th Circuit. But in this story, Jen, we're not quite sure. We know that we've got some developments that could potentially impact Alex Murdaugh and his bid for a new trial on the double homicide convictions that were doled out by a Colleton County jury back in March, but we're not sure. This is a story that is still very much unfolding, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I almost consider it a Murdoch spinoff. Wow, it's just bizarre.
I like that. I like that. Like their own little franchise branching out down there in Colleton County. Well, let's talk first about what we're talking about. What happened this past week? FITSNews exclusively reporting. And in fact, this exclusive reporting began earlier this month. Our Andy Fancher was first to report that the son of Becky Hill, the clerk of court in Colleton County, who announced those guilty verdicts to an international audience back in March, Colt Hill is his name. He is the information technology director for Colleton County, or was. We're going to talk about his status with the county here in a minute. But Andy Fancher reported earlier this month that he was under investigation by SLED, the State Law Enforcement Division, the agency that investigated the Murdaugh homicides, all the Murdaugh investigations. And this investigation into Becky Hill's son clearly bore fruit, didn't it, Jen?
It did. So Andy Fancher reported this week that Colt Hill had been arrested and was in custody in Colleton County. I believe it was, this week's been weird and fast. I believe it was Tuesday, right? Tuesday or Wednesday.
Right.
Yeah.
And one charge of wiretapping. And again, we don't really know the details. All of this was very secretive. Mm-hmm. The release of this information has been, in fact, the bond hearing for Colt Hill was closed to the press. Just something unheard of as it relates to this story. It's led very limited in what it has released about these allegations. But Jen, you know a little bit about this. You've been following the scene down there in Walterboro since before the trial. What are you hearing from locals about what these charges are?
What I'm hearing actually is that it's not related to the jury tampering allegations. It's completely separate. Something to keep in mind, and everybody's saying, well, how does this matter in terms of the jury tampering allegations? Well, Becky's phone, they issued a search warrant for it, and it was handed over to SLED. So it does matter.
I kind of buried the lead there, didn't I? We were talking about the arrest of Becky's son, Colt Hill, obviously the arrest warrant and the probable cause affidavit there, but there was also a search warrant served on Becky Hill herself for that cell phone, and clearly investigators wanting to look at that device. And Jen, what kind of Pandora's box are we looking at with Becky Hill's cell phone?
So, I think a big Pandora's box. That cell phone, that's what she was communicating on during the trial, after the trial. And when you get a search warrant for a cell phone, you're looking for evidence. They had already arrested her son, so they had enough probable cause to seek an indictment. They got their indictment, arrested him, and then they got a search warrant for Becky's phone. So that means they had probable cause to get a search warrant for Becky's phone.
And that's significant. But let me ask you this question. You're telling us that your sources on the ground in Colleton are indicating that this has nothing to do with the jury tampering allegations against Becky Hill tied to the Murdoch trial and the bid for Alec Murdoch to get a new trial. So if that's accurate, why do we care? Why do people following this saga care about it? And I'm not saying they don't, because clearly the engagement we saw in the aftermath of this story was off the charts. People very
So,
interested in it.
I mean, I think that ties back. You want to go back and look at the Attorney General's response to Alex's defense's motion for a new trial. And their response, I mean, our last interview, the title of it was Becky Fires Back. Because their response was heavily based on Becky and what Becky says did and did not happen during the trial of Alex Murdaugh with the jurors.
And her sworn affidavit
And
in that
her
response as
sworn
well.
affidavit with, I did, I did, I did, I didn't, I didn't, I didn't. All these like point by points. Now we're looking at Becky's credibility. We're looking, it's going to, when they come to an evidentiary hearing, a lot of it's going to be based on what Becky says happened versus what these certain jurors said happened. And we're weighing credibility here. And
That is very good point.
yeah, I mean, everything that happens. So if they've got a search warrant for Miss Becky's phone, are there more indictments coming? Will there be indictments for her?
And if she is there indicted in connection with this, how does that impact the credibility in that evidentiary hearing? If you missed our last show, by the way, we reported on a little bit of intel regarding the timing of that big evidentiary hearing and Alec Murdaugh's bid for a new trial. We are hearing it will not be held until February or March of this coming year. Obviously, Judge Clifton Newman recused himself from hearing anything related to the murder convictions. Judge Newman was challenged by Alec Murdaugh's attorneys to recuse himself. He did. That was announced earlier this month in a ruling from the Supreme Court. And so we will get a new judge for that. Jen, what are you hearing, by the way, on that process? Who are you hearing could be the judge that hears this big evidentiary hearing on Alec Murdaugh's bid for a new trial?
Oh, the speculation is all over the place on it. I think that your source who had said Gene Tolles, the former Chief Justice Gene Tolles' name had come up. That's the one that seems to be most in legal circles, most talked about. I don't know if that's just because of the name or if that is really what they're hearing as well, but would be an interesting choice. I mean, they've got to really find a judge who has the experience to handle a trial that is this high profile and this public.
Oh, yeah, it's huge. And particularly if Alec Murdaugh is awarded a new trial. I mean,
Right.
we're in a position now. You and I talked about this on the show. You indicated the last time we talked about it that there was very little chance for a new trial for Alec Murdaugh if Judge Newman were presiding over this evidentiary hearing. But now that he's not, I think you had said you were over 60%, or your number went way up, if I recall, Jen.
He recused himself, and I really wasn't surprised by that move. I think he knew he had to recuse himself. I think it made sense. He he is he respects the law and his role in this process, and it didn't surprise me but that he did. But we're waiting for the Supreme Court to appoint a new judge to oversee that. And I think I think him recusing himself from hearing that puts those chances that they go higher every time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree completely. And I think that a dispassionate judge, if we have, as you mentioned earlier on the program, there's a standard here that our audience really needs to keep in mind. And you referenced it in our last show, Jen. You talked about how that word could. It's not that any improper communication did influence the deliberations of the jurors, or if they say it did or didn't. It's that it could have, because Becky Hill, as a public official, that standard's different than if it's just anyone talking to a juror, right?
Right. Right. And we've got a couple of jurors who are saying that they heard before the trial that, or heard during the trial that Becky had said watch his body language before he testified. And does that is that enough? She really shouldn't have had any conversation with the jurors about what to consider in the courtroom, what they're hearing in the courtroom. And if she says she didn't say that, we're looking at her credibility. And right now, her credibility isn't great.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, though, because again, you and I have known Becky Hill for a long time. We worked very closely with Becky Hill during the trial, have interviewed her before, since, during. So obviously, she's someone we know very well. And I just want to point out something that has kind of been on my heart over the last couple days. Are we concerned about the allegations that have been raised? Yes. I know I'm concerned about them, and I think that if it's a he said she said situation with some of the jurors, or she said whatever, don't know where that goes ultimately. But as it relates to Becky Hill, I think it is important to point out that the only reporting that we've heard um, leading up to this has been that there is substance to her denials, that there is some credibility to her assertions that she did not tamper. And so I think it's important as we move this forward. Again, I think, has Becky Hill perhaps played a little fast and loose with certain things? Clearly. I think the timing of the book, and maybe even the whether the book was a good idea, we can certainly discuss that as well. And I know that you've heard there's some inconsistencies between her accounts in the book and what other folks are saying. We're going to talk about some of those in just a sec, but it's very important, I think, to point out that these are just allegations at this point. Um, Becky Hill has denied them. Um, and while we all know Becky Hill, I think likes to be in the middle of things and maybe has played fast and loose. I mean, this is different. I mean, she's been accused of tampering with the jury and trying to manipulate an outcome. I mean, do we really think Becky did that? I mean, I don't know. I have a hard time
I
wrapping
still
my
have a
brain
hard
around that.
time getting there as well. I mean, I just, I don't think that if I don't think she would intentionally tamper with the jury. And that's just my personal opinion based on my knowledge of her. And I know I do know her, and I got to know her during the trial. I mean, it would be hard for a journalist in Walterboro to not get to know Becky.
Hmm.
So yeah, I struggle with that. I really do.
But then on the one hand, we've got what we know of Becky and what we have believed, and until they prove it differently, what I still believe of her integrity. We've got that on the one hand, but then on the other hand, we've got these reports we keep getting from very trusted sources in this process. And I want to throw a few of these out there. Let's drop a couple bombs here. In her book, Becky Hill speaks frequently of conversations with Judge Newman that she had every night, portraying their relationship as very close and talking every night during the trial. We are hearing that the judge was not happy with that reference, that he did not believe that that was accurate, and that if called to testify as a fact witness at this evidentiary hearing, that he is in fact going to refute a lot of the contents of Becky Hill's book. And so if you've got Judge Newman refuting her accounts, Jen, how does that sit with you?
I think knowing how well respected Judge Newman is and how ethical everyone believes him to be, including myself, that's not going to look great.
And that could also, as you mentioned, further diminish Becky Hill's credibility. Let's assume there's, obviously she's the focus of this investigation, or at the very least, a person of interest in this investigation involving her son. So you got that to consider. You've got the possibility that Judge Newman refutes certain things that she said. Let me throw this one at you. We've been told, sources that are very close to the jury process, who were following this at the beginning, through the trial, through the continuation of the trial, the deliberations. We've been told that a few of those jurors had business cards from NBC News prior to their deliberations, which,
Yeah,
what's going on there? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I that came from a very good source, and the source reminded me that we had discussed that during the trial. And I remembered the discussion and thought, oh boy, you are right. We did have that discussion before deliberations.
And again, no impugning a media outlet. We're going to do whatever we can to
I,
get the story. So again, I'm
well,
not
when
saying
I heard that they had the business cards, I was like, Will, where's your business card?
why did I throw mine in the mix? I tell you, we go back. And I tried so hard to play by the rules. I don't know if our audience knows this, but when the jury was coming back with the verdict, I just randomly happened to be in the courtroom at the time that was going down. And if you remember, we weren't allowed to bring these cell phones uh, in the courtroom. They were strictly verboten by Judge Newman. But I had my phone in there at that particular time when all this was going down. And I remember looking at all the other reporters and saying, I promise I'm keeping it in my pocket. I'm not touching it because we just tried, to respect the integrity of that process. And I would have loved to have pulled it out and snapped and tweeted a Murdoch verdict picture, but just didn't feel like that was the right thing to do. But, Jim, we talk about this media involvement, and certainly there were things that the media was not allowed to see in this trial. We were not allowed to see the crime scene photos. We were not allowed to see the autopsy photos. We were not allowed to see the unredacted body cam footage from the crime scene, the first responders. So I don't blame the media for pushing for that kind of access. I think there's an obligation to do that because we need to be able to tell our audience, hey, what you're hearing from the defense, what you're hearing from the state, we can tell you what's what because we've seen the evidence. And the state and the court did not provide that in this case. And I think that was a disservice. But if those media business cards we're talking about were on those jurors' desks on the tables in there, what does that mean, Jen? Is that another wrinkle to the request for a new trial?
Sure is, because Becky put in her affidavit that she did not provide the jurors with business cards prior to deliberations.
A very specific denial.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, let me ask you a bottom line question. Let's just dispense with all these kind of particulars. Let me bottom line it for you, and you tell me honestly, did Alec Murdoch receive a fair trial in Colleton County this year? Yes or no?
I think he received a fair trial. Yes, I think he received a fair trial.
Okay.
I do have a lot of concerns about the jury. I have a lot of concerns about the jury and the jury deliberations. And, everybody's like, well, he did it. He's where he's supposed to be. Well, if the system doesn't work for the worst of us, if the system isn't fair for the worst of us, we can't assume it'll be fair for the best of us.
Yeah. Or the rest of us, any of us. Yeah.
Right.
That's a very good point. So let me ask you this. You think he got a fair trial, yet you believe he should get a new trial. Is that what you're telling me? How does that math add up,
Oh
Jim?
gosh, it's hard.
I'm
Yeah,
putting you
I'm
on the
struggling.
spot this week, aren't I?
I know this is a tough one. I mean, I think the trial process. I think the decisions made legally during the trial were fair, but I'm very concerned about the jury deliberations. Looking back, should there have been a change of venue? I wonder if there should have been a change of venue. Should those jurors have been sequestered? I There's a lot of things looking back that we didn't. Judge Newman made those decisions. We didn't question them. But would that have prevented this?
Yeah. No, those are great questions. And yeah, I struggle with it too, because I do believe based on everything I know at the moment, and again, we've got a big evidentiary hearing coming up where Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, I believe, are going to make a very detailed case as to why they believe Alec Murdoch did not receive a fair trial. But based on everything I've seen, right now I would agree with you. I think he did. I also agree with you. He's where he needs to be for life. Was a little surprised he didn't get a little more time on those state charges, but I certainly understand what the prosecutors were dealing with in reaching that plea deal last week. But you're right, Jim. We just don't know. That evidentiary hearing is going to be huge, which is why I believe the defense's big win last week was, again, that recusal from Judge Newman. It completely changes the complexion of that evidentiary hearing from a guaranteed loss for the defense to one where it really is up in the air. And I think that's as it should be. I mean, I think this is something I think Judge Newman made the right call to stay out of that, particularly since we now know it's looking like he's going to be on the stand, Jen.
Right. I mean, it's good. I mean, I would be shocked if another judge looks at this and determines there does not need to be an evidentiary hearing. So I think that's a very good assumption that we can make, that there will be one. And I think Dick and Jim have been looking real cocky for very good reason.
Well, let me ask you about that because, yeah, they did seem very self-assured at this hearing in Beaufort last week. Do you think that some of this has to do with the drama surrounding Becky Hill, surrounding her son, and this arrest and the seizure of her cell phone last week?
I do. I mean, we know now that the wiretapping incident for which Jeff Hill was indicted occurred July 20th, 2023. So well after the trial. But the ethics investigation and the investigation into that wiretapping began in September. So this has
That's
been
right.
ongoing. This has been something ongoing. I think the fact that that SLED or whoever the lead investigative agency is into the Jeff Hill investigation got a search warrant. They had enough probable cause to get a search warrant for Becky Hill's phone after her son was arrested, indicates something happened with that wiretapping, with that recording of that phone conversation that they believe is tied to Becky. Whether or not he sent that conversation to Becky, whether she directed him to do it, asked him to do it, there's something there that they believe ties Becky to it, which is a big problem for the state.
Yeah, huge problem because, again, as you noted, this investigation with Becky Hill's son with her phone, it could have absolutely nothing to do with the Murdoch case, with the Murdoch jury. It could have nothing to do with it, and yet it could still impeach Becky Hill's credibility as a
And that
witness.
search warrant, so when you get a search warrant on a phone, you can use what you find on that phone if you find evidence of other crimes. It's open. It's like if you get a search warrant for a house, you have a search warrant for the whole house. If you've got a search warrant for, you know, attempted murder, and you go in that house, open the closet, and find, a pound of cocaine, you can charge that person with possession of cocaine. So
Absolutely.
it's opening the door to a lot of everything.
A big Pandora's box. You said it
Mhm.
earlier. That's absolutely right. And if that warrant, if it's lawfully issued, which this one clearly was, yeah, whatever they find is open season. Do you get the sense, Jen, that part of this may have been to get the phone?
That's how I feel.
I mean, we're two conspiratorial people, so
Uh, I do, which I think is interesting because we were so concerned about the investigation and SLED being in charge of that investigation and it not being fair. And I feel a little better about it now. But yeah, I think they wanted that phone.
yeah. SLED did promise at the beginning of the jury tampering investigation that it would follow the facts where they led. It was very similar to statements that we heard from Chief Mark Keel of SLED at the very beginning of these Murdoch investigations when there was so much concern about would the Murdoch's influence impede investigators? Would it keep prosecutors from pushing for the level of justice that the victims deserved? Clearly, that did not happen. They've been a full court press against the Murdochs from the beginning, justifiably so, based on the crimes which have now either been admitted or or proven in court, I would argue. But yeah, we just don't know where this thing's going, Jen. I mean, my goodness, we thought it was over. We thought it was done. We thought we would be looking at an appeals process that was based on some technical admissibility rulings, and I think they do have a
I do
fairly
too.
good case on some of those things. I mean, I don't think I disagree with Judge Newman on his decisions regarding admissibility, but I think that, as we've reported, there are a lot of judges who disagree with that, who are very worried about the admissibility. But boy, we have gone a long way in a very short time from focusing on an appeal based on admissibility to the very, very good chance that this guy could get a new trial.
It's funny because last week when you told me that you had heard from a source that if there was an evidentiary hearing, it wouldn't be until February or March, you're like, I feel like we're going to get a little bit of downtime to focus on additional stories. And I kind of chuckled inside and said, haha.
Yeah.
But I was talking to an attorney this week, and they said they felt like the Murdoch case is like Clark Griswold's Jelly of the Month Club. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, that's a better analogy than the one that Dick Harpootlian used in court last week, referring to it as an STD. So I don't. It's a gift that keeps giving. But Jen, I just want to thank you once again. Obviously, this is the most complicated story I think either of us are ever going to cover. It continues to get more complicated the further we get from what we thought was a resolution here. But I want to thank you for coming on, for helping us make sense of this, talking through a lot of these things, and obviously a lot of ground covered on this segment. But you really helped make it clearer for our audience. And again, our Murdoch expert, Jen Wood, our research director, Jen. Any predictions as we await this hearing next week for Alec Murdoch as he's sentenced on the financial crimes? What do you think is going to happen there?
I have none. I mean, they agreed to 27 years on all of those charges, including the drug charges. They did clarify that, which he's going to have to serve 85% of that, which is 22 years. I mean, can Judge Newman throw a curveball and not accept that sentence?
Could conceivably.
Yeah.
I do think that he indicated at the hearing last week that he was inclined to accept it, but certainly he wants to
Mhm.
hear from all the victims, wants to hear from Alec Murdoch. And one other thing that was not addressed at the sentencing was the notion of Alec Murdoch paying restitution. So we got to find out exactly what sort of restitution agreements are going to be worked out between state prosecutors and defense attorneys, and what will Judge Newman agree to when it comes to restitution. But yeah, Jen, I don't predict any big surprises this coming Tuesday, November 28th, down in Beaufort. I think
We
Judge
are
Newman.
we are going
Oh
to
yeah,
cover it live. Yeah. And I think from what I'm hearing from the attorneys and the attorneys of the victims, there are going to be some very fiery statements. I think they've been waiting for this opportunity. So I think it'll be, cathartic. I mean, I'm hoping to hear, some, relief from these, as they speak what they've wanted to say.
well, certainly a last chance for a lot of the victims on the financial side. Obviously, Murdoch's been sentenced already at the federal level on the crimes he was charged with and pleaded guilty to at the federal level. He's now pleaded guilty to these state charges. So this really is one of the last chances for the victims of his many financial crimes, who again, just some of the most vulnerable people in very vulnerable situations. Alec Murdoch took advantage of them, took advantage of his friends, took advantage of his own family. So yeah, it'll be a very emotional day down there in Beaufort. Jen, looking forward to you providing your commentary on that hearing this coming Tuesday.
Hopefully it's not 4 hours of downtime like the
I
last time,
don't
but
know.
yeah, it'll be fun.
Well, thank you for again such a great job at the last hearing, and looking forward to hearing your observations on this next hearing.
Thank you.
Jen Wood, everybody, our Murdoch expert. Want to thank her once again, and we will keep you up to speed on the very latest as this never-ending story continues to be told. All right, once again, I want to thank Jen Wood, our resident Murdoch expert, our director of research. She has been breaking down these incredibly complicated narratives and narrative twists for some time now. Jen is going to be hosting our live stream this coming week, too, by the way, as Alec Murdoch appears in court in Beaufort, South Carolina, once again for sentencing on those charges, the financial crimes he pleaded guilty to last week. Jen was holding down the fort on the live stream a week ago. She'll be doing the same this coming week as Alec Murdaugh faces the music on those financial crimes. So keep it tuned to FITSNews, our YouTube channel. And once again, if you watch us, if you like us, if you've been a member of our audience for some time, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. That really helps us as we push up to that next level of viewership. But more importantly, as we contemplate this season of Thanksgiving, one of the things I know I'm thankful for is to all of our subscribers. Your subscriptions help us do this job. They help us hold the institutions accountable here in South Carolina that are supposed to be serving all of us, but for far too long have been serving a select few and dispensing not justice, but as we frequently called it, injustice, the South Carolina injustice system. Your subscriptions are helping us turn that around on multiple fronts. So if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to FITSNews.com. It's only $8 a month. And once again, we are advancing the cause of accountability here in South Carolina, and your help is something we're tremendously thankful for. We will catch you next time on The Week in Review.